Hello. This time I'm not talking about a weighty political issue. I want to discuss even not a cultural issue so much as a cultural moment and a very different take on an American classic that is now completely denigrated and dismissed, and it shouldn't be. During the COVID and Black Lives George Floyd era, Netflix had Gone with the Wind, the movie, running on its channel, and someone resurrected the description Netflix had put up on at the time. That description, if I click on the link, it's no longer there. So apparently Netflix, after the kerfuffle yesterday, quickly cleaned it up. But there are, of course, screen grabs. So let me share with you how Netflix described the movie. The classic 1939 Academy Award winning blockbuster, at one point one of the top moneymakers in all of American movie history. A 1939 American Civil War epic known for its racism. To learn more about Black lives in America, search Black Lives Matter. So Netflix, a really openly leftist outlet, steered its viewers away from an American classic and to a basically communist site that was concerned with bringing all of America down. The reason I want to talk about it is because I've always loved Gone with the Wind, but I view it now differently than when I was young. I probably first read the book when I was 10 or 11. I still remember I finished the book when my parents had gone out for the evening, and when they came home, they found me in floods of tears, absolutely incoherent, and they were naturally panicked that something horrible had happened, and it took quite a while for me to calm down enough to tell them that I was crying because Melanie had died. Not long after that, the movie came to our local theater. That was in the day and age before DVDs and streaming and everything, that when a classic like that came, you wanted to see it. It wasn't shown on TV. Unlike Wizard of Oz, which was shown every year, but this, you had to wait till it came to the theater. And I was again blown away. It is a beautifully done movie. The costumes are dazzling, and I've always loved historic costumes. They did a fantastic job. And Clark Gable, I fell in love with Clark Gable. I still think he's one of the best character actors out of Hollywood. And if you're wondering what character he played the character of Clark Gable. After that, as a teenager, I kept going back to the book and the movie. Whenever the movie was available, I watched it. I reread the book frequently. I was all caught up in the romance, as most people were beginning in the 30s. And the Hollywood movie opens with this image of the Confederacy as a time of chivalry and men and their ladies in war and loss. It's all wrong. If you go back and read Margaret Mitchell's book, it is one of the great American novels. It's fantastically researched. It's wonderfully written. It is a driving, epic saga, and everybody gets it wrong. For starters, there's nothing nice or even courageous about Scarlett O'Hara. She is simply a single-minded sociopath. And when you get older, you really should lose patience with her. She's awful. Melanie is saccharine. Ashley is horrifically weak, an unpleasant character. The two moral forces in the movie are Rhett Butler and Mammy. I want to discuss both Margaret Mitchell's depiction of the South through these two characters, and I want to discuss the moral weight they bring to the book, which is much more important than the movie. First of all, Margaret Mitchell fully understood how degrading slavery was. She portrays accurately her character's horrible racism towards their slaves, and their comfort with a debased institution, one that I should say violates the Eighth Amendment because it is a form of thievery to thou shalt not steal. When you steal a man's liberty, you violated the Eighth Amendment. Unless, let me say, due process of law, and they have broken the social compact and through a civil process or a criminal process duly ended up in prison. Different subject. She shows 3 different ways Blacks were able to handle the indignity and the loss of liberty that slavery represented. You had Pork, the butler, who just becomes a a mainstay, a gentleman. He is the gentleman's gentleman in a world of savages, and the savages are white. You have Mammy, who becomes a powerhouse in her own right and is a moral voice, who repeatedly reminds Scarlett that she has strayed beyond civilized behaviors. So, and she is respected for doing so. And then you have the most interesting character, Prissy, who responds to what has been done to her by true passive resistance. So Prissy, if you've read the book, you won't know this from the movie, but if you've read the book, Prissy is extremely bright. When she says she doesn't know nothing about birth and no babies, her mother was a midwife and she is lying. Prissy's way of handling slavery is to slam on the brakes and to be willfully, purposefully obtuse. She is fighting the institution as hard as she can, and we see what happens to her, the abuse she suffers, but she will not give in. So Margaret Mitchell fully understands that it is a grotesque institution. She had the casual racism of her day and age, but if you ever read about her, she was actually a very progressive woman. I believe she and her husband were swingers. So, Margaret Mitchell was not some delicate Southern flower, and she moved in very progressive circles and almost certainly understood the horrors of slavery. The other thing about Rhett Butler is he stands out as the movie's practical intelligence center who gives voice to what he sees in the South, antebellum, during the war and after the war. And what he sees before the war is a very debased society. And I'm not just talking about the slavery. He understands that it's just totally stupid to go to war. They have no industrial base. They have minimum shipping. They have a finite population. They have the risk of their own slaves rising up against them. All they have is an idiot commitment and guns. And I will say that kept them going quite far because they were passionate in their beliefs and they were cavalier about the soldiers were fairly cavalier about their lives and willing to bear tremendous discomfort. In their own ways, they were very brave men, but they were foolhardy men. And then during the war, Rhett provides a running commentary about how stupid the war is. And after the war, he simply embraces the new reality and says that the South cannot survive if it pig-headedly refuses to cooperate with the new overlords, which is the other half of the United States of America. So he is a pragmatic approach. The other thing is that Margaret Mitchell fully understood that the Southerners who were fighting this losing battle were reprehensible people. She describes Scarlett O'Hara's neighbors as people who were uneducated, hard drinking, short-sighted, uninteresting people. Ashley stands out because he's well-read. Most of them, all they know is hounds and hunting and slavery. They are profligate. They are all that is really disgraceful behavior. And again, let me go back. Margaret Mitchell, very sophisticated woman, she and her husband, maybe too sophisticated in their personal lifestyle. If you've ever read Thomas Sowell's brilliant Black Rednecks and White Liberals, or it might be White Liberals and I think it's Black Rednecks and White Liberals, he describes why for so long the South was perceived as a cultural backwater. It wasn't just because of slavery. It was because it was a cultural backwater. The Scots-Irish who had settled there were famed for a few things. They were famed for promiscuity. They were famed for alcoholism. They were famed for gambling. They were famed for laziness. They were famed for just an inability to plan for tomorrow. You name a cultural vice, drinking, drugs, and sex, not working, shiftless, as the Southern expression went, and you had it in those Southern whites. Now, a few of them, a very few, rose to huge economic success with land, and we remember them as the founding fathers and the big plantations, etc., etc. But most of them lived lives of short-sighted, self-abusive squalor. And that was their Scots-Irish heritage. What changed it, according to Sowell, was World War I, which started a slow process of integration and seeing themselves through other eyes and relearning discipline in a military that was not dedicated to slavery and traveling abroad. and especially in this regard, World War II, which was a real melting pot war, and then the civil rights movement, where Southerners saw themselves on TV as animals, and it shocked them. I live in the South now and feel very fortunate to do so because the South is much less racist than where I lived in California. People are incredibly hardworking. It is dynamic. It is clean. It is a civil society. The only segment of America that, as a whole segment, retains those cultures is part of the Black community. And that they maintain that culture because they were sold a lie by Democrats. And what Democrats told them was that this white Scots-Irish 18th century culture is their culture. It's not their culture. They wouldn't survive long in an African tribe if they behaved as they do. It is not even a borrowed culture, but an imposed upon them culture that is leaving them in a backwater of poverty and malaise and death and squalor as surely as it did huge sections of the pre-Civil War South and also the Reconstruction South and the Jim Crow South. Everything that was bad in the South and that Margaret Mitchell saw so clearly, blacks mistakenly believe is their culture. And it's one of the great national tragedies, and it's all on Democrats' shoulders. And some of them are going to go to hell for what they did. In any event, I urge you to reread Gone with the Wind with an open adult mind, recognize it for the great American novel that it is, and also understand what Margaret Mitchell really said rather than the 1930s gauzy, pretty costumes, tragic love affair gloss that it ended up being squeezed into and that it's now perceived as being. And on that note, I will leave you until I see you or rather, I guess you see me another day. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me here.